As an avid buyer of Harbor Freight tools, there are many things that are worth warning you about, and many things that are worth encouraging you to buy. So I have here a bit of a history of Harbor Freight chainsaws, and when I was first making this video I was actually talking about how great their new one was, and then I realized that when I bought one again it was different, and I realized they're entirely different item numbers. So I have a message of warning here. This I bought many years ago. You can see it was Chicago Electric at that time. Then they switched it over to Portland, and their latest stuff is also Portland. You can see though, these are identical casings. And I don't know if they changed the gear inside of it or what, but this one failed in the first use, and it wasn't even that heavy duty, the use. In fact, it still has oil in it, probably the original oil. I haven't even been able to use it since. Kind of thought, oh, maybe I could take it apart and use it for something. So, to be clear, the motor did not die. The transmission itself died. What's interesting is this lasted so long, and it's still running strong. This is one of my primary chainsaws. However, this one died first use, and then I bought one recently, this one, and it's the same as this one. So I believe this may be a totally just garbage chainsaw, pretty universally, since it became Portland. Like I said, I think they must have switched out some of the components. Maybe not. Maybe I just got lucky with this one, unlucky with this one, and this one I don't know yet. However, I would like to encourage you, if you manage to find it, to get this version of their 14-inch electric chainsaw. You might have to find it online, I'm not sure. They may have even discontinued it. Let me point out the key differences here. Right here you can see it has many more of these wedges for gripping into the bark. That is a small difference though. The safety is a huge difference. See how the safety is much more convenient? Look at this safety. You have to push it up like this. I know that's not a big difference, but if you're doing a lot of cutting, it starts to really hurt your thumb compared to pushing on the side. But the most important part is the trigger orientation. So you would think that because this trigger is right here in the back, that you push it up in the back, but you don't. What you actually do is push it up in the front. And because of that, you have to really kind of like lean into it and hold it there. It's very, very uncomfortable when you're doing a lot of cutting. And that's the same flaw that's in that older version of that same chainsaw. This one is a total game changer though. With this one, you have the much more convenient safety, and then watch what happens. See? It's in the back right here, where you have all that leverage. It's much more comfortable and ergonomic. So you can do hours of cutting with this much more comfortably. Really until it gets too hot. Once it gets too hot and starts stinking up the resin on the windings of the motor, it's time to stop. That's when you switch to one of your other chainsaws, if you're doing that much cutting. So you might be thinking, in general, these 14-inch blades are not long enough. However, I really only like dealing with trees that are a maximum of around 30 inches or so. And that's more than enough, because you can get a theoretical 28, and you know, that's really all you need for the vast majority of trees. People really like these much longer blades, where you have, this is 16-inch, this is, I think this one's 18. So I was, when I started doing a lot of cutting down trees, I really wanted the long blades, because yes, they are more convenient, they're easier, but they're also more dangerous and less maneuverable. And then when I switched to electric, I got this 16-inch blade here. But this Works chainsaw company, I would not recommend. The problem is that this thing spins way, way too fast. It spins at about the RPMs you'd get out of a 2-cycle, which is too hot. What happens is your chain is then heating up, and then it's dulling much faster. Additionally, you definitely need to use real bar oil when you're using something at that speed. And you would think because it's moving really fast, it's cutting really well, but it's not. It's actually incredibly low torque on 2-cycle and on this Works chainsaw, and this even draws 15 amps, but it cuts more slowly. both of these chainsaws cut maybe 2/3 the speed of any of these other chainsaws. Any one of these Harbor Freight electric chainsaws cuts much faster and with less effort. And the reason is because they're higher torque and lower speed. I haven't actually bothered to do the measurements or calculations to find out what the speeds are, but from experience, you have to kind of fight with these electrics from Harbor Freight because they have such a high torque and such a low speed. So sometimes they'll catch on something and you'll just tear out chunks. I mean, they cut really, really fast. As far as I can tell, once the Chicago Electric was switched over to Portland, which is probably just purely a rebranding and nothing else, these newer ones are just total trash. And I say newer. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to have to check the availability of these, but this is the only electric chainsaw that Harbor Freight sells that's worth a damn. Do not get this model over here. If you can get this online or in store, you should, because this is a really good electric chainsaw. It's comfortable, it has high torque, low speed, cuts fast, and it moves so slowly you can even use used vegetable oil as your bar oil, and it doesn't really gum it up. I've been using that for years, and this is not gummy. I mean, maybe a tiny bit, but if you were to use that in anything where it's moving really fast, that would gum up immediately. In case you are investigating works, to my recollection, some of the issues, even though this has this nice adjustment right here, this chain comes off pretty easily, and this thing slips, like the tensioner system just slips on it. And like I said, this chain moves really fast, but it's low torque. And on a 15 amp breaker, this was popping it all the time because it's 14.5 amps. But when you have that first inductive surge, it's pulling more than 15 amps and tripping it. Whereas all of these are 9 amps. And you can run this and one other thing pretty easily on a 15 amp or a 20 amp breaker. And I've never had any issues popping these at all. Well, I decided to take this apart to see the mode of failure, and not surprising at all, it is a plastic gear right here, and not nearly strong enough. Alright, so I've taken all three of these apart to see what differences there might be. All three of them use plastic, a molded plastic, as the opposing gear. But there are differences I can see. Offhand, you can see that this has a guard and a sprocket, and then this one just has an exposed sprocket, and this one has a different sprocket design. So there are these differences between them. What else is there? Well, these look pretty identical, other than this one failed really, really poorly. They look very similar. I don't see any real difference. So why did this one get all chewed up? This thing has had years of service, and it hasn't had a single tooth fail from this plastic design right here, and yet this one, every single one of these teeth failed. Did they forget the fiberglass or something in this casting? I mean, what is going on? It's bizarre that this one failed first use, and this one doesn't have a single failure after years of service. What about the other side? No, this looks pretty much the same between both of them. So that's really peculiar to me. And what about this one? Well, this one is indeed quite different. Although it's still, they're similar, but I don't know that there's a single part on this model that is shared with this one. I mean, even the reservoir is entirely different. You can see right here, there's this piece. I'm not entirely sure what that is. I would assume it's probably for oiling the interior. You know what? Well, this thing actually has a thin layer of oil in it. So I don't think it was a lack of oiling. But you can see there's actually quite a big difference between these two pieces. If we compare diameter, you can see that the outer diameter on this one is roughly the inner diameter on this one if you are going to the end of the teeth. So obviously that's going to provide more surface area, which keeps things cooler and has fewer points of failure probably. This gear itself is also a larger gear. So this model is indeed different enough that, you know, I would still say that it's worth a shot. Like, if you are leery of cheap tools, Harbor Freight is probably not for you to begin with, but if you wanted to get a cheap tool, this 14-inch electric chainsaw, this particular model, is quite a bit different than this other model that I keep accidentally buying. Learn from my mistakes. Don't buy this model. Anyway, I hope that you guys find that useful. Post in the comments your own experiences. If you have some other favorite electric chainsaws, I'd love to know about it. So I was trying to remember what went wrong with this works. And so I just plugged it in and fired it up, and yeah, it dimmed the lights and such, but it was running fine. And then I got an odor, and I remembered the motor is the weakness on this. You know, putting it through a lot of labor, it pulls so much juice. I think they probably don't have enough of a padding in terms of how much amperage it's drawing through that magnet wire in the coils of the motor. So basically, this thing is high power, but because of that, it burns itself out. It's not a very good quality motor. But I was looking at the rest of the design. It's not that bad. So one thing I'll say about this, if I lift it right here, it's pretty well weighted. Like, this is kind of the center. If I lift one of these, you see what happens there? It just wants to go whamp. You know, these are just a terrible design. Is the one that I like any better? Actually, it is a little better. Not a lot better, but a little better. So one of the problems with all of these Harbor Freight chainsaws that I've noticed is they all want to kind of start cutting like this and go like this. And it's because of that bad weighting. So this will want to cut a little bit straighter as you're going. This thing's going to want to just do this because that's exactly how it's weighted. So, you know, on paper, this thing looks like a fine chainsaw. So I don't want to offend any Works fans, but when I'm doing serious chainsawing, this thing has let me down. When I'm doing serious chainsawing, this Poland has let me down. And yet this $40 piece of junk that I bought is just kind of like, let me just try it. It's only $40. This thing has lasted me so long. So why that other newer model failed on the first use, I'm really not sure. Was I abusing it that badly? Probably not. I suspect it was a defective gear that was manufactured or something.